familiar with Enhanced Movements, Boulder County's premier chiropractic pain and injury consultant. We're here doing our Movement Monday course today, talking about hip hinging and how to challenge the hip hinging pattern, especially if it's something that's been challenging for you. Hip hinging would be movements such as kettlebell swings, deadlifts, basically the movement that is the primary kind of shape that we'll be taking when we're picking things up. Why? Because it's super beneficial for our bodies from a leverage standpoint, but we want to be able to maximize that leverage by hip hinging appropriately. So what does a hip hinge look like? A hip hinge is, the reason why we call it a hip hinge is we want you to think about the hip being the primary position or the primary focal point that we're actually spinning around. So the hip is a ball and socket, it's a big greasy joint, and we want to be able to articulate our body around that, not necessarily through the lower back or the knees. So if I'm doing a deadlift or like a kettlebell swing or hip hinge movement, if this is my hip here, this should be that primary joint that's getting most of the motion out of it. Now, it seems kind of counterintuitive when you actually see the motion because this is doing most of the translation, meaning the chest and the torso is actually appearing to be doing most of the movement, but it is around the hip joint. So if you imagine my gray shirt here being a canister, this is like a Coke can or a beer can or some sort of canister, this pivots around the ball and socket joint of the hip here. So it's basically just bending over it. If you were to imagine like my elbow doing the same thing, right? I'm just rotating about that. I don't want to be here for doing those movements because I don't have as much leverage into those posterior chain muscles that we're trying to do. So we're trying to tighten that up by getting down into that position, and then we stand up. So if we're doing like a sumo deadlift here with the kettlebell, we're not going to go all the way to the ground just so you guys can see the bell. From that side profile view again, you should see that my canister or torso maintains that same shape as I pivot around. So I feel now with the weight, the hamstrings and the glutes lengthen and load, kind of like what you would see with like a bow and arrow. And then with that, you get that tension that allows you to pop and snap back up. So whether that be a deadlift, or that would be a swing, which is just much more dynamic, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to encourage and show is that this shape should not change as we go up and down. That's what we're trying to maintain. Different cueing obviously works for different people. Some over cue as far as keeping this stiff, which then changes into us being super rigid in our back and we don't want it to fall forward. What we try to emphasize is trying to move the hips backwards behind the feet as much as you can and letting the torso naturally just balance you out. It's a game of balance, right? My feet are my base of support, and whatever my center of mass is, that has to be on my base of support. So if I'm too far back, I'm going to end up falling backwards. If I'm too far forward, my heels are going to come up or I'm going to come up on my toes. So when repatterning this hinge, find a solid position with your feet underneath your hips. Toes are pretty much going to be slightly forward. They might be toed out ever so slightly, but I want you to reach your butt back, and as that butt reaches back, if you feel like you're starting to come off balance, you're going to let your torso or your chest balance you out while maintaining a long spine. What we're not saying is this, right? As this reaches back, I'm going to let this fall to balance me out, keeping my center of mass on the feet. So this is great if you're not accustomed to really doing a lot of pulling, you're just getting into weightlifting, or you've been doing weightlifting or training for a while, you just don't feel like you've patterned that down. Practice. Body weight, dowel on your back, anything that helps kind of cue you to be leaning into those hips more and trusting that that weight can go into those hips more, okay? If you have any questions, reach out, work with your trainer, work with your coach, work with your sports chiro, your sports physio. This movement's just paramount for these types of activities that you want to be able to do. And it's really important that you nail them down, not only from a kind of a safety standpoint, but also from a leverage standpoint. Again, more leverage allows you to lift more weight. Allowing to lift more weight safely and more effectively. It allows you to also get stronger. So there's a lot more benefit to just doing it correctly. So thanks again for tuning in, guys. This is our Movement Mondays. Every Mondays we're dropping these out. If you have any questions, again, you're always welcome to reach out to us. If you're having some concerns that you need maybe like a coach's eye for, we do also provide virtual consultations. No matter where we are, we help you just like this through the phone or the computer, workshop the things that you're having trouble with so that you can maximize your range of motion, maximize your body's potential to do more things. So if that interests you at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. We love working with people remotely and virtually to get you to where you want to be able to, get you to where you want to be. So thanks again. Chat soon.